yet, but sources telling me and our colleague Jake Tapper that the Inspector General for the Pentagon did conclude that Pete Hegseth, the Secretary of Defense, risked compromising sensitive military information which could have endangered American troops and risked mission objectives when he used signal to share that information about an ongoing military operation targeting the Houthi rebels in Yemen. That was back in March. You may remember that these messages were revealed after Atlantic reporter Jeffrey Goldberg was accidentally added to this Signal group chat. And some of these messages are so specific, one of them even saying from Hegseth, quote, "This is the exact time the bombs will drop." So the Inspector General has been investigating Hegseth's use of Signal for several months now, since April. And we're now finding that he came to the same conclusion that many of the critics, current and former U.S. officials did at the time, that Hegseth should not have been using Signal to communicate this sensitive information to other Trump officials, and that he could, the potential consequences of that could have been dire. The IG also concluded, too, that there was no documentation, as far as they could find, that Hegseth made a choice to declassify this information before sending it to the Signal group chat. Now, that's important because we know that the information itself was from a document that was marked classified at the time, and the inspector.
You just watched the Pentagon's own Inspector General confirm what we all feared in our bones. That sickening moment when institutional accountability meets the dark reality of this administration's contempt for our most sacred obligations to the people who wear the uniform and put their bodies between us and chaos. Because Pete Hegseth risked compromising sensitive military information, which could have endangered American troops and mission objectives when he used Signal in March to share highly sensitive attack plans targeting Houthi rebels in Yemen. And I need you to understand what that actually means, not just as a news item scrolling past your feed, but as a fundamental betrayal that cuts to the core of what Republicans have been selling us for decades about who gets to claim the mantle of national security expertise. This is about hypocrisy so profound and shameless that it reveals the entire conservative mythology around patriotism and military strength to be nothing more than a cynical political costume worn when convenient and discarded the moment accountability comes knocking at their door, because we're about to tear apart every single lie they've told about their commitment to the troops, about their respect for classified intelligence, about the very rule of law that supposedly separates us from authoritarian nightmares, and you need to be ready for what's coming. Here we have a defense secretary, handpicked by Donald Trump, a man whose entire confirmation was predicated on Republican senators, assuring us he would restore warrior culture to the Pentagon, who took information from a U.S. Central Command document marked classified, specifically marked secret/no foreign, meaning no foreign nationals should see it, and proceeded to blast it across Signal group chats that included not just other officials but his wife, brother, and personal lawyer, none of whom had security clearances for this material. The Inspector General found that Hegseth revealed how a strike would unfold, and when, including the use of F-18 fighter jets and Tomahawk cruise missiles, writing, "This is when the first bombs will definitely drop," with military time precision, and if your blood isn't boiling yet, if you're not feeling that white-hot rage at the sheer recklessness of putting American lives at risk for what appears to be nothing more than macho posturing in a group chat, then you haven't been paying attention to what conservatism has become in this country. And here's where it gets even more disturbing, because this isn't just about one catastrophic security breach. This is about the Defense Secretary sharing similar details via Signal about U.S. military operations in Yemen with several other people who were not authorized to review the information. And we know from the investigation that one witness recalled being part of about a dozen separate Signal chats that included Hegseth, which means this pattern of cavalier disregard for operational security wasn't an aberration, but standard operating procedure for someone entrusted with the most sensitive military secrets our nation possesses. The Pentagon's own Watchdog concluded that because the information was so sensitive and risked putting troops in danger if it fell into enemy hands, it should not have been relayed using the commercial app. And yet, when confronted with this damning assessment, when given the opportunity to sit down with investigators and explain his actions like any lower-ranking service member would be required to do, Hegseth told the Inspector General he believed the investigation was political and lacked faith in the Inspector General, refusing to sit for an interview and only providing written responses. Now let's talk about the staggering double standard that Republicans want you to ignore, because Hegseth himself said on Fox News in 2016 about Hillary Clinton's emails that any security professional, military, government, or otherwise would be fired on the spot for this type of conduct and criminally prosecuted for being so reckless with this kind of information. And He asked how damaging it is to recruit allies when they worry leaders may be exposing them through gross negligence, saying if it was anyone other than Hillary Clinton, they would be in jail right now, because foreign governments target unclassified means and gather intelligence from them. Do you see what's happening here? This isn't just hypocrisy. This is the complete moral bankruptcy of a political movement that spent years, literally years, weaponizing national security concerns against Democrats while setting up the infrastructure to excuse infinitely worse behavior from their own people, and we know from reporting that Mike Waltz, who accidentally added the journalist to this group chat, criticized Jake Sullivan for sending top-secret messages to Clinton's private server, tweeting in 2023, and what did DOJ do about it? Not a damn thing, and lamenting how Hillary Clinton could delete emails while Trump gets indicted. The Republican Party built an entire political brand on the supposed sanctity of classified information. They held countless hearings, they demanded investigations, they turned but her emails into a rallying cry that helped elect Donald Trump in 2016 because they convinced enough Americans that Hillary Clinton's conduct as Secretary of State and her mishandling of classified information was disgraceful, that there was no excuse for her private server which left sensitive information vulnerable to theft and exploitation by America's enemies. Yet when confronted with evidence that Hegseth violated Defense Department policies by using his personal device for official business to transmit sensitive U.S. military information, including real-time strike coordinates, including the exact moments when bombs would fall on targets, including operational details that if intercepted could have gotten pilots killed, they pivot to calling it a total exoneration and close the case. Let me walk you through what the comparison actually reveals, because FBI investigators found 52 email chains from Clinton's server that contained information later deemed classified, only 8 with top-secret material, and almost none had markings indicating classification at the time, whereas Trump took more than 325 classified records to Mar-a-Lago, including at least 60 top-secret files containing foreign intelligence from the CIA, military plans from the Pentagon, intercepts from the NSA, and nuclear secrets from the Department of Energy, and in this case with Hegseth we have CF Army General Michael Eric Kurilla using a secure government system to send detailed information about the Yemen operation to Hegseth, including exact warplane launch times and bomb drop schedules, information that if it fell into wrong hands could have put pilots in grave danger, much of which appeared on the Signal chat Hegseth shared with other officials, and on a separate chat with family and his personal attorney. The intelligence community operates on the principle that you zealously guard classified information, that you return all documents when you leave government service, that what Trump and Hegseth have done is so far beyond anything any human being has ever done at the highest levels of the U.S. government, with classified information, requiring very special attention according to national security experts. And when you look at the timeline of how this administration has handled Yemen operations, when you understand that the United States launched Operation Rough Rider in March 2025 as the largest U.S. military operation in the Middle East of Trump's second term, with strikes beginning March 15 targeting radar systems, air defenses, and ballistic and drone launch sites, you begin to see how this signal breach wasn't just some administrative mistake, but a fundamental compromise of an active combat operation, where at least 53 people were killed in the initial U.S. attacks, including 5 children and 2 women, with 98 injuries, a statement so divorced from the findings that it represents either deliberate gaslighting or such profound institutional capture that the difference no longer matters. We're watching in real time as Republican officials, who spent the Obama and Clinton years constructing elaborate theories about the deep state and its protection of democratic wrongdoing, now deploy that same apparatus to shield their own from consequences that would destroy any other government employee, with Representative Jim Himes noting that Hegseth's behavior would be a fireable offense for anyone else in the Department of Defense, and his refusal to sit for an Inspector General interview or submit his device for examination is another example of his failure to take responsibility. This moment demands we reckon with how Republican rhetoric about supporting the troops has always been a cynical ploy to accumulate political capital while treating actual service members as expendable props in their culture war theater, because Senator Mark Kelly said it's clear Hegseth shouldn't have been using his cell phone and an unofficial app for sharing that information, noting it's not too hard to see how adversaries can get that information and pass it to the Houthis, putting those lives at risk, Pansol, and when you combine this security breach with Hegseth facing scrutiny for allegedly authorizing strikes on a Caribbean boat that killed survivors clinging to wreckage, denying he directed the second strike but facing questions about whether he committed war crimes, you start to see a pattern of someone who treats military power as a video game where consequences happen to other people, The conservative movement has spent decades constructing a mythology where they alone understand sacrifice, where they alone can be trusted with violence, where questioning their judgment is tantamount to treason, yet here stands their chosen defense secretary, someone whose leadership has been dogged by controversy, with critics highlighting that the Army National Guard combat veteran and former Fox News host lacks the same level of experience as his predecessors at DoD, demonstrating through his own actions why blind deference to the flag is no substitute for accountability. The philosophical question we must confront is how a political party can claim moral authority on national security while systematically undermining every norm and institution designed to protect it, and the answer lies in understanding that conservatism in its current form has abandoned coherent principle in favor of pure power maximization. The reporting in The Atlantic highlighted a Republican White House demonstrating an indifference to security more obvious and immediate than anything Clinton was accused of, with a demonstrable failure to preserve operational security, revealing they never actually cared about Clinton's tech practices in the first place. This is Carl Schmitt's friend-enemy distinction applied to national security classification, where the content of rules matters less than who they protect and who they punish, where Hillary Clinton could write in the New York Times that it's not the hypocrisy that bothers her, but the stupidity, noting that both Hegseth and Waltz, who were on the Signal thread, previously criticized her for using a private email server, and the reason they can get away with this whiplash-inducing reversal is that their base has been trained to see political combat as existential rather than procedural. We need to understand what happens when Hegseth only provided a few of his Signal messages to the Inspector General, forcing investigators to rely mostly on screenshots from The Atlantic, because this obstruction isn't just about one man protecting his career. It's about establishing the precedent that Republican officials exist outside the accountability structures that govern everyone else, that they can refuse cooperation with oversight, that they can claim authority to declassify information retroactively without documentation. While the IG concluded the Defense Secretary has authority to declassify, but Hegseth asserted he made an operational decision in the moment to share information, though there is no documentation of such a decision, creating a Kafkaesque loop where power justifies itself through its own exercise. This is how democratic norms die, not through dramatic coups, but through the steady accumulation of exceptions where those in power claim special privileges while demanding strict adherence from opponents, and when the release of this investigation compounds existing concerns from lawmakers on both sides about Hegseth's judgment, bringing renewed attention to an issue that nearly led to his firing months ago. We see how institutional memory within Republican ranks gets deliberately erased to protect the hierarchy. The tragedy here extends beyond politics into the realm of genuine national security catastrophe, because when you compromise operational security to share strike plans on commercial apps, when you include unauthorized individuals in sensitive communications, when you treat classification protocols as optional guidelines rather than legal requirements, you don't just risk that specific operation, compromise credibility with allies given that both the NSA and Pentagon warned Signal was vulnerable to hackers, and you send a message to adversaries that American security is performative. Intelligence sharing depends on trust, on the knowledge that when allies provide sensitive information, it will be protected with the highest level of care, and every single partner nation watching this debacle now has to calculate whether sharing intelligence with a Trump administration that treats security protocols with such contempt is worth the risk of exposure, creating cascading effects that undermine cooperative efforts to counter genuine threats, while friendly governments and allies who share intelligence regularly must be wondering how to react when countries see this level of indifference. What makes this especially galling is how the conservative media ecosystem has already begun its work manufacturing alternative narratives, where Hegseth is the victim of partisan prosecution, where the real scandal is that someone leaked to The Atlantic, where focusing on the security breach itself is somehow a distraction from the real issues they want to discuss. And you can watch in real time as Republican voters who spent years chanting "lock her up" about Hillary Clinton's emails now contort themselves into pretzels, explaining why this situation is completely different, because their tribal identity has been so thoroughly weaponized that contradictory positions can exist simultaneously without cognitive dissonance. This is what Hannah Arendt warned about when she wrote about totalitarianism's destruction of factual reality, where Senator Mark Warner noted the IG is aware of several other Signal chats Hegseth used for official business, underscoring this was not an isolated lapse, but reflects a broader pattern of recklessness and poor judgment from a secretary repeatedly shown to be in over his head. Yet the administration can simply declare victory and close the case because their base has been trained to accept whatever narrative serves immediate political needs. So where do we go from here? How do we respond to this latest demonstration that Republican claims about national security expertise are hollow theater? And the answer has to begin with refusing to accept their framing, with demanding that Democrats and progressive allies stop playing defense and start prosecuting the case that the modern conservative movement is fundamentally incompatible with responsible governance because they've abandoned every principle they once claimed to hold. We need to connect this signal breach to Trump's Mar-a-Lago documents, to the pattern of treating classified information